I think like, obviously what you're saying about listening to your customers being so important is clearly 100% true. I don't think any business can succeed without doing that really well. A lot of the time when I think about customer feedback, and obviously I have to think about this a lot because as the founder of a startup, you live or die by how well you listen to it. I sort of tend to bucket our feedback into kind of two primary categories, maybe three. Category three, which is kind of important to listen to, but it's kind of paper cut feedback, as we call it. Like, oh, like this like aspect of the product is a little slow, or I would
Mm-hmm.
love it button was like over here, that kind of thing. And that's like helpful to address because it helps generate the kind of customer trust in the idea that you're like listening to their feedback at all, right? And then that kind of gets you to like level two, which is the sort of, it's not necessarily like direct feedback about the product, but it's a clue for like what maybe your team should build. So, that kind of thing that you talked about around, okay, what's like missing, or like, this is what my workflow looks like today, and you guys are like doing a great
Mm-hmm.
job solving that. But actually, not feedback really directly about your product at all, but like the next thing I do after I use your product is I do this, and I like hate doing that, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's sort of interesting as like a clue into what to build. And then I think there's a third category that falls like, outside of the scope of the previous two, which is more like subtle, nuanced stuff about like the way the product should function. So, like a simple example of this for us is like, okay, well, a lot of our customers, when they're interacting with their internal data in Creedle, will want to be able to ask things like, okay, what are all of the updates on, customer X in the last 3 weeks? And that sort of question of like which documents and which sources and which updates around the company's data systems are related to or relate to customer X is not something that's like necessarily stored super clearly. And so
Mm-hmm.
it's a nuanced thing of like, okay, you probably have to build a knowledge graph to be able to do this really well. And like, you have to extract the entities of like the customer, and the customer is an important entity, but maybe there's like 10 or 12 other important entities that you need to like have a conception on. I'm super interested for you, like, what are some of those nuanced, subtle, like, it's not directly obvious from what the customer is saying, but you can kind of tease out what you need to change about your product from what the customer is telling you. Like, what are some examples of that you guys have had on Big E?
Yeah, so there was sort of a moment where there was a lot of focus on kind of problem management, which the whole purpose of that is like let's take a step back and what are the recurring issues? How can we kind of permanently address process or system stability to really prevent incidents or at least reduce them, right? And so a lot of problem management is having that bird's eye view.
Yeah.
And, you know, while back then you could ask Biggie like, hey, what are some trends in all of the incidents for the past 6 months? If all you have is sort of basic RAG, like, semantic search, you're not going to get a great answer, right?
Right.
To your point. So we sort of realized like, yeah, we do want semantic search for many things, but for other things, we need an entirely different approach. So it's one thing if it's sort of completely unstructured data, start to finish, and you want to do like named entity recognition, and probably knowledge graph is a great place to store that. But a lot of the questions that we were kind of focused on answering, the answers actually resided in ITSM. So like the ServiceNows, the Jiras of the world. And so our approach was, okay, so let's build agentic integrations with these systems. And by that I mean like a source specific agent that is efficient at traversing various APIs and kind of works until it's done. It can do sequences of calls and kind of reason. And, so that sort of was the initial approach there.